Thank you so much. That was a great panel. Next up, we have Alex Connolly, the CTO and co-founder of Immutable X. I know a lot of people in this room were waiting for Alex. We need to give him a little bit of a break because he flew in from Sydney this morning, and as everyone knows, it was a little tricky getting here. But I'm really excited about this, Alex, and I know a lot of other people are excited about it. I'll just mention a one-liner on GameStop. GameStop announced that they are supporting the NFTs from Immutable. This is a really, really big deal. We've seen a lot of big announcements around Reddit and Apple and GameStop, but this one is interesting. And as Alex just told me, they really care about NFTs. So, but there's more than that. So, Alex, take it away.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. First off, thank you very much for waiting. Apologies that I couldn't be here a few minutes ago. And if I seem a little sleepy, it's because I've just gotten off the plane. I'm super excited to be here, and I hope everyone is looking forward to NFT.London for 2022. I'm Alex. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Immutable. Immutable's goal is to power the next generation of Web3 games. And you'll see that written around a lot, on t-shirts, on various things. Today, I want to talk to you about what that actually means. What are the challenges facing the current generation of Web3 games? What the next generation of Web3 games will look like? And probably the question on everyone's lips, when will they be here? Slide, please. First, I want to talk about the state of Web3 gaming as it stands today. So despite the overall downturn in the crypto market, 2022 has seen by far the largest ever investment in Web3 gaming in the space's history. We've already seen $7 billion put into Web3 gaming this year, and we're on track for $9 billion by year end. To put this into perspective, that's about 60% in the first half of 2022 of the total amount of VC funding being invested into gaming, just into this sector. That is a huge signal of confidence in the space, as well as a huge testament to the size of the opportunity that's facing us. Slide. So what is everyone seeing in Web3 gaming? Why is this a space where people are pouring billions of dollars of money into? Why am I standing up here on a stage talking to you about it? It's because every year, players spend more than $100 billion on in-game items in free-to-play games. And that grows by about 10% every single year, like clockwork. But there's an obvious catch. Users own $0 of those assets. Most are completely untradeable, and those that are tradable are usually tradable on sort of grey, illegitimate markets outside the control of the developer with things like bot farms, where players are subject to a really large degree of risk. NFTs represent actually a really clear and direct value proposition for most gamers. Trade the assets that you've already purchased in games across a wide network of marketplaces without having to worry about the game developer switching off your account or eventually just shutting down the servers. But the benefit for NFTs in gaming goes well beyond just this basic, simple trading. NFT critics, we found, often talk about this and say, okay, well, they could just use some everyone could get on the same central trading server and someone could just run that. What I think this is overlooking is one of the reasons that Web3 gaming has grown so quickly over the course of 2021 and 2022. Even 3 years ago, the idea that most major game studios in the world, right, and almost all of the mid-market game studios in the world, would be talking about using a shared asset standard for items in their games. I want to step back for a second, just think about how unrealistic that might have seemed 3 years ago. The idea that everyone would sort of consent to all being on the same platform or using the same types of standards, even when markets existed like the Steam marketplace. Almost every AAA game studio in the world, if you've ever used a game on Steam, every single game is putting a launcher directly after the Steam launcher just because they don't want to be reliant on Steam infrastructure. Right? Game studios are deeply parochial. And it's only because the NFT standards are open source, independent, and available to anyone, right, that they've been an acceptable option for studios who don't want to rely on another third-party provider. Right. Making the assets in your game NFTs gives you not only immense trading benefits, but also gives you access to a huge network of third-party tools and marketplaces that have been built to cater for NFTs. This is what I call the NFT network effect. As each new NFT project or marketplace launches, we see on the right side of the screen here, as soon as you, as a game, decide to make your assets NFTs, those assets can be tradable on a huge variety of marketplaces, have access to a huge variety of tools, right, and can be used on a huge variety of platforms. Right? And that is a network effect that is here today and is consistently growing. And importantly, this applies well beyond gaming. I'm up here talking to you about gaming. Every time we do something that helps NFT artists grow and be successful, there are sort of cross-benefits and cross-pollination to other NFT verticals. There is a huge benefit that's emerging just in the investment in NFTs. And we believe that gaming will be the beachhead for NFT adoption. Most NFT users will end up having one of their first, if not their first, NFT experiences in gaming. Next slide. To prove this, I want to look at the state of Web3 gaming in terms of the actual people who are trading these assets. So up here, I've got a screenshot from a couple of days ago of the top 20 collections by volume on CryptoSlam. Right? I want to point out some really important stats. So if you look on the left here, games in aggregate here are by far the most widely traded types of NFTs. We have about 200,000 monthly traders compared to substantially fewer in most other NFT categories. Right? The top 5 projects by user count are in fact all gaming projects, right? Which is some testament to the fact, the panel previously were talking about onboarding users who are just here to sort of play games and experience that ownership. There's a huge statement of that right here. But at the same time, we also need to be honest with ourselves. We are yet to see a breakout hit in Web3 gaming. Axie Infinity reached a brief peak, and games like Gods Unchained have seen consistent growth, but none of these games have ever even come close to the distribution or adoption of even a moderately successful mainstream mobile game. And you can see that just by looking at those monthly trader numbers. Right? Volumes across the NFT space are deeply down even compared to the peak at the end of last year. And there is a deep chasm to cross. My prediction is that before we see a hit produced by a traditional mainstream game studio, we will have one or more disruptor hits emerge from Web3 native companies to prove out this model, right, and to give them a template to play from. So what's preventing us from getting that breakout hit? Next slide. I mean, the first thing that's worth calling out is just simply time. High-quality games require large investments of resources in terms of time, in terms of cost. Even the large inflow of funding that I talked about earlier, that accelerates things, but it doesn't magically make game development take 2 months rather than a year or 18 months. But there's also a really core tension that's begun to emerge in the space, right? And that's between the things on the left and the things on the right. The balance that all Web3 games have to strike today is between solving the UX challenges that we all know exist with Web3 games and accidentally compromising the core user proposition of those Web3 games. By now, almost everyone who's building in the space has had some experience with the things on the left. Things not working, onboarding flows being challenging, developer experience being a huge hurdle. And we've poured a huge amount of resources into solving some of these problems in the past few years. But unfortunately, we're still falling short in a number of areas. Right? Sometimes that's because of technical challenges, but most commonly, that's because we make choices on the left which are compromising the things on the right. For example, on Ethereum, NFT projects have access to really strong liquidity and security, but we all know about some of the scaling challenges that most projects have run into. But some projects, in seeking to solve those scaling challenges, have almost over-indexed in the other direction, right? And they've chosen solutions which isolate them from liquidity, isolate them from existing user bases, right? Or compromise the decentralization of these assets in the first place, right? Our view is that if we make Web3 games so Web2 that no one wants to or can trade the assets and no one can reap the benefits of those games, then why should users want to play it any more than a regular Web2 game? Right? We also think sometimes that games go too far in the direction of things on the right, right, and building sort of very on-chain native, very sort of deep Web3 games that are totally inaccessible to the Web2 audience that's going to be needed for sustainable growth. At Immutable, our fundamental belief is that games shouldn't have to choose between the things on the left and the things on the right. We think we can make Web3 games mainstream by solving the challenges on the left without compromising the ability of users to own their assets, without compromising the ability of users to have self-custody, to have interoperability with other projects, right? Or even just to have basic liquidity with other users and a platform that people actually want to trade on. Right. Next slide. At Immutable, we exist to bridge this gap and stop mainstream Web3 games from being an oxymoron. So, where to from here? Well, so far, we've actually seen what I sort of describe as 3 separate eras of blockchain gaming. Firstly, on the left, we have some of the Generation 1 NFT games. So these are the NFT games that were built around the start to the middle of 2018. And some of you may even remember some of them, right? They weren't very fun, right? And I should know because we built one of them, right? Second, we have the games in the middle, right? And this is the era where we really saw the first truly playable Web3 games. So on the left, we had a lot of things fully on-chain logic, a lot of sort of like, not going to care about user onboarding. Everyone's just going to get it and love it and use it. And in the middle, what we had was games sort of coming to grips with the realities of, hey, we want to make a game that's playable, that's fun, that can grow to millions of players, right? But we're sort of battling against the technology, right? And we're trying to make everything work for us, right? I think Axie is a really great example of this. So Axie, obviously, even to build the experience that they had to set up their entire separate blockchain, had to release their own wallet, built their own DEX, right? Built their own block explorer, right? And built essentially an entire ecosystem of tools, right? Which honestly is far more than we can expect any game studio to reasonably do, right? And my view is what we'll see on the right is the first time that we'll see sort of games, which I call these third generation or next generation blockchain games. Right? And those are games which are going to be able to effectively balance the trade-offs of Web 2 and Web 3, right? And to create an experience that's great for people to play, unencumbered by technical hurdles. I want us all in this room to be very honest about the state of this. Like, we are sort of at the forefront of trying to push this forward, and we are not there yet. There are still really important technical challenges to solve before we have Web 3 games that are capable of mainstream adoption. But by the end of this year, right, we're expecting to have several playable games which we believe can credibly attract mainstream attention. That's not just games on our platform. We've included Midnight Society here, a game building on Polygon. There are a ton of games that are now pulling into the space where we have awesome opportunities to actually make those games be something that users really want to play. Right? And we think that's actually something that's incredibly important to the space. I think one thing you'll go about, if you go and talk about NFT gaming or Web3 gaming, right, the term controversial sometimes comes to mind. If you go on Reddit or something like that, you'll see a lot of people who are up in arms about it. And I actually have a really deep empathy with those people. For most of the last 15 years, it's been a very one-way traffic in the world of video game development. And that's been sort of increasingly aggressive monetization from studios. And players simply don't trust studios in many ways anymore. Right? But we believe that that criticism will only last as long as it takes us to build games that people genuinely want to play, where people can actually experience the value proposition of these assets. When you're playing a game where, hey, this feels just as fun as another game that I could be playing, but now I'm able to own and trade my assets entirely at will, we believe that is just such a huge value proposition for users. Right? But the best way for us to convince users of that is not doing what we've done for the past couple of years, which is sort of like sell the big future dream about what this is eventually going to look like. Right? It's actually to go and build these Generation 3 games where people can actually go and play with these assets and use them to onboard millions of people into the Web3 ecosystem. Okay. Slide. I think maybe let's go to the next one. And to do that, I think we've actually built a little bit of a reel to show off some of the game projects that are currently working with us. Very exciting. So, that was the hype reel. But for the rest of the talk, and before we get carried away, I actually want us to ask a different question. Go to the next slide. Not quite. And this is actually a question which is a bit of a challenge to us in the room. You'll see a lot of people up on stage today and over the next few days talking about, hey, we want to take these games mainstream. Hey, we want to onboard millions of mainstream users. And the question that I have for us to answer is, are we actually ready? If you go back a couple slides, back to the question slide, we'll get there in a sec. Back. Are we actually ready for mainstream adoption? And are we ready for Web2 studios? Right. Not would we like them to come on board these platforms, but actually are we capable of giving those users and developers a genuinely great experience? We have a responsibility as the early adopters of this ecosystem to ensure that as we bring people on, we don't turn them off by overpromising and under-delivering. We are still so early in this space's development, and still so much is in flux. And to illustrate this, I think let's talk about the topic that's been on everyone's mind for the past few weeks, and that's the topic of creator royalties. Next slide. Last year, royalties were a core monetization stream for NFT creators. Ethereum creators earned almost $2 billion in NFT royalties over the course of the past 2 years, which is a huge amount of money, particularly considering that a lot of that money is going directly to creators or artists who managed to become successful over that period. Right? So a huge amount of revenue for those creators. Right? But what we've seen over the past few weeks is that royalties are under enormous threat. Right? So we've seen several marketplaces make royalties optional. We've had several marketplaces sort of switch things off in an attempt to make sure that users didn't leave their marketplaces for other platforms. And from a marketplace's perspective, that's completely understandable. If royalties aren't going to be enforced on-chain, then there's very easily going to be a direct sort of race to the bottom on which marketplace is going to make users pay more fees. Right? And someone is going to blink first. Of course, many traders in the community have looked at this as a win, right? And said, okay, well, it's actually way better for me that I don't have to pay these royalties and I just prefer to pay lower prices, right? The challenge that I want to make to everyone here today is when we talk about being ready for mainstream studios, one of the things that has to be ready for mainstream studios is certainty and control over monetization. The idea that you could build a business based on sort of having $2 billion of royalties on the left-hand side, and several weeks later be finding yourself with a business with almost $0 of royalties on the right-hand side is extremely concerning to people who want to explore the space. Right? Whatever you take as the ideal outcome, right? Like we want there to be a very open, transparent, and honest conversation in the community about this. Go to the next slide. We are currently at a very major crossroad for royalties. There's been a number of options proposed for what we as a community can do to try and make sure that there is clarity in the community and amongst developers around what can be done here. And this is something that's extremely important to game developers. The reason that I'm up here talking to you about it today is actually because this is one thing that we frequently hear from game developers, which is, hey, we want to experiment with monetization models that are not directly sort of microtransaction based. Whether that's they want to do, like, have royalties be all of their revenue stream or part of their revenue stream. This is a top of mind conversation for many major studios at the moment. And so far, there's been a few options that people have proposed. We can make royalties fully optional and just entirely leave it up to users and marketplaces. Some people have proposed providing users with upsides, so like rewarding users for paying royalties with some extra NFT utility in-game. Or the inverse of that, downside, punishing users who don't pay royalties in-game. Some people have proposed modifying ERC 721 or ERC 1155 itself to sort of try and lock trading going through the main contract. And we've seen these last two as sort of new entrants. Firstly, the idea of a blacklist, the idea that it could be acceptable to ban users from trading through certain contracts on-chain, right, if those contracts didn't respect royalties. Or secondly, the idea of a whitelist, right, so having it so that contracts would have to be registered with each individual collection as, hey, this NFT marketplace or trading contract supports royalties. All of these approaches have massively different trade-offs. And the questions that we as a community have to answer are, how enforceable do we want royalties to be? What control creators should have over those royalties? Should you be able to only lower royalties after you create a collection? Should you be able to raise them but only after a community vote? Should it be completely arbitrary? And how granular should that control be, and when should that control cease? And all of these are fundamental to the property relationship between games and users. Next slide. So today, what we're super proud to announce is that this is something that we've been thinking about. And we have so far, and today what we're announcing is that Immutable Royalties, which currently works on our application-specific rollup, is going to be extending to also support EVM chains. What does that actually mean? Well, up until now, Immutable's application-specific rollup has had fully enforceable royalties for the people who are trading NFTs through our contract. So if you're a game and you build on Immutable, you're able to enforce your royalties. What we're announcing today is that we want to make this functionality available to everyone on Ethereum and also on all EVM chains. This is a huge deal for many creators because it means that they are going to be able to basically choose their own strategy when it comes to the enforcement of royalties. If they want to choose to have optional royalties, they can do so. If they want to choose to have hard enforceable royalties, they can do so. Our big belief is that creators should be able to choose, but also users should be able to respond to that choice by voting with their feet. If you disagree with the strategy that a project's taken with royalties, or you think it doesn't lead to long-term alignment, we want to make sure that users have the clarity, knowledge, and empowerment to do that. The more technically savvy of you in the room right now might be sitting there thinking, hey, I thought this was an intractable problem. Or like, I thought royalties couldn't be enforced on public blockchains. Well, one thing we're going to be sharing with the community over the next few days is that we have a design for how it would be possible to basically provide different levels of royalty enforcement through the concepts that we discussed earlier. Basically, we want to create a community-governed blacklist and whitelist for royalty-respecting contracts that NFT creators could use to basically say, hey, I'm willing to have my royalties be fully enforceable or mostly enforceable, and that will even depend on the type of asset. For low-value assets, making it just challenging to circumvent royalties might be sufficient, but for very high-value assets, we probably are going to have to do some on-chain work to make this happen. Of course, there are big composability impacts, or at least automatic composability impacts, to changes like this. So for instance, saying that we will only whitelist contracts, if your project chooses to only whitelist contracts that respect royalties, that might mean that you start off by only supporting major NFT marketplaces, and new NFT marketplaces would have to come and basically register with the DAO and say, hey, we're going to support royalties indefinitely to be included as an option. There is some really, really cool stuff that we can do here around making this substantially less frictionful. With some of the things that we talked about down the bottom. So account abstraction, and making sure that people are still able to use smart contract wallets. We can do things like comparing and verifying valid bytecode, or even having at a sort of a bytecode by bytecode level, custom function verifiers to say, hey, let's inspect the conditions under which we're going to allow this contract to be used for NFT trading. We say all of this because we think this is such an important thing to make sure that both games and artists and other creators in the space have access to state-of-the-art tooling for choosing the monetization mechanisms that they want. We think we have a novel design for how royalties could be enforced in some areas and enforced more laxly in others, and we are super excited to share this with the community over the next few days. We are super excited about expanding this to Ethereum because we think this not only is beneficial for the games community, but also for all other types of NFT creators. We think there is a ton of really good work to do here. I think I should just quickly finish up. If you just go to the next slide. I want to zoom out for a second. If we take it all the way back to the beginning. So in 2018, one of the games we put up for a Generation 1 NFT game was one of the first playable on-chain games. In 2022, almost 5 years later, we stand on the precipice of the first Web3 games which are genuinely capable of attracting a mainstream audience. At Immutable, our goal is the same as ever. Keep building products and games which help bridge that gap. Whether it's wallets, APIs, developer experience, new royalty standards, improvements to underlying sort of NFT infrastructure, we want to be there to help games make that transition. And even in the depths of the bear market, there are so many projects here that we're so excited to talk to, and please feel free and talk to us at level 4 at the Immutable Gaming Lounge. As I wrap up, I want to finish by reminding us all why we're here. Every single day, our world is becoming more digital. We are spending more and more of our lives in digital worlds. Whatever you're building in Web3, whether it's a game or not, we are all part of that same mission, ensuring that this new digital world is built on foundations of genuinely true ownership. And I think the next generation of Web3 games will be the generation that remembers that. Thank you.
That was an incredible presentation, Alex.
Thank you.
So, for those of you who don't know, this man has actually not gone to bed for 24 hours. And for me to see that extraordinary energy in the way you have and passion that you have, absolutely, I'm with you. I love it. It's for me, industry is about the people. And thank you for that incredible presentation.
Thank you very much.
I have one question for you.
Go for it.
What is it about the immutable blockchain in sort of 60 seconds or less that makes it better for game developers to use compared to the other chains?
Absolutely. So the first thing to say is that Immutable runs what's called a zero-knowledge rollup rather than an independent blockchain. Right? This is really cool because it lets us inherit Ethereum's security and basically have some really fancy scaling tech without having to cut the bottom out of the decentralization.
So it's fast.
It's fast, but it's still secure. So we haven't just sort of turned off the decentralization to do that. But the most important thing I'd say about the way that we built for games is we're not like a blockchain that sort of built out a big horizontal layer and then said, okay, we'll go to marketing games. Or we'll go and do a marketing campaign where we're attracting games. From day one, we've been trying to make decisions that are in the best interests of game developers. It's our background. We care about game developers. For instance, the fact that we have not very low gas fees that you still have to pay in a native token, but no gas fees and you don't have to pay in a native token. That's something that is very important to many games when they build frictionless onboarding experiences. And hey, when weekend rewards finishes and you want to just use a REST API to give you a synchronous response of, hey, I minted 1 million NFTs, that's a pretty powerful value proposition for many games.
Fast, no gas fees, and you go to bed at night dreaming about gamers.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. And the Immutable Lounge is on level 4, is that right?
Indeed, on level 4.
And you'll be hanging out, signing autographs and kissing babies.
Indeed. I think speaking of Titus, I'll be back here. I think I'm on 2 panels later in the day, so looking forward to them too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
See ya.
Thank you very much.